Apologies for the late video, but I forgot to make one today, so might as well make it now. Now today, let's examine socialism, the economic system, and I'll make a proposal on how to succeed like I did with anarcho-capitalism. So first, what is socialism? How do we define it? Well, it is best defined as public ownership of the means of production. Now, of course, who and what practicing socialism very much changes what the public is. For example, in statist socialism, which most know with things like Cuba, the USSR, and Mao's China, the public is the state. The state owns things, and they decide quotas and everything. Syndicalists, on the other hand, believe corporate syndicates or unions should own the means of production. That is their public. Then there's, of course, social democracy, which is, again, people own things rather than the state, but they vote in the state, and so on and so forth. The definition of public really depends on which socialist branch you're looking at. That said, it all features consolidation within a public sector. So it doesn't matter what you use, unions, co-ops. If everything is owned by these groups, it is fundamentally socialism. That is the basics of it. Corporatism, which is a separate economic system, relies on private-public partnership, so while the state will own some things and will regulate the rest, the private sector still exists, basically as long as it pays heed to the interests of the corporate state. Capitalism is private, so if you have ownership, it's under private means. Now, the state can own some things to some extent, but it's not controlling everything else. They may set a regulation, but it's not, you must do this for us. It's just, oh hey, by the way, pasteurization is now required. That is the extent. The state can have some ownership, but it can't be the main one or the sole one, and that's capitalism. Freedom of association and freedom of ownership is the basics of capitalism. Socialism, again, public ownership. So, through one of these, you can have socialist policies economically. This requires a severe centralization, because in order to coordinate, lots of centralized power is necessary. Now, with more co-op oriented socialism, you can sort of get around this, especially if you have market socialism, where basically there's a bunch of co-ops and unions that are doing their own thing. It's still public ownership, but they don't own everything like a state would in a command economy, so they still have to trade. But for the most part, socialism requires a large amount of centralization, so bureaucratic waste. In general, I would not say it's a good idea. Plain and simple. I'm not a person who agrees with it. I'm very much a capitalist. Anyone who's seen my other videos would know this. Not a fan. It's inefficient, as can be seen with their attempts to adapt the internet and numerous other incidents. For example, when they sent a dog into space, they miscalculated, and the dog literally just got cooked and died in space. It also, alongside its inefficiency, worsens quality of life, because fundamentally, if people can't get what they need, things get worse, and inefficiency and corruption tends to seep into these systems. And as just mentioned, corruption is very common. Because if everything's coordinated in one group, it naturally becomes very easy to essentially bribe a group, and suddenly you have a large sway over the entire operation. For example, let's say a co-op owns a business, right? So you have your electric company, and it's owned by the co-op. Well, only so many people are going to show up to the shareholder meetings, of which the shareholders are so many people. And of those that do, heck, even if you assume everyone shows up, there will be a few influential people that most people turn to because, let's face it, some people just want to clock in and clock out. Most people don't want to go to work and just say, yes, I have exact interest in how we spread our budget. They just care that they get paid, they're providing service, maybe that they're helping the community, depends on the person, and that's it. They don't have interest in shareholder meetings and much else. So the few that do will have more influence, and it's a lot easier to bribe them, thus corruption gets really deep into the state or the business in the case of a co-op. So needless to say, not a fan. But let's draft a proposal. Let's say socialism wants to get in charge. You're a socialist party and you want to gain influence. How do you do it? Now, I won't say succeed economically because all the data I have shows that you wouldn't. But let's actually ponder this. How should socialists go forward? Now, the last thing you want is armed revolution. Simply put, that would end very poorly. In the United States, the largest military in the world, not going to end too well. In other places, similar deal, or you'll have a civil war that means you'll lose a lot of production and thus you won't have the stuff needed to actually run your country. So what should you do instead of armed revolution? Well, help people. I once saw a news story where a bunch of socialists, it was like the Communist Party of the United States or United States Communist Party, one or two, there's several, were helping people locally after a natural disaster. Now, these people are literal Stalinists. I'm not a fan, needless to say. But when they help people, I was like, okay, you're doing good things. And I guarantee you most of the people at that disaster were thinking, hey, these communist guys ain't too bad. These people practicing socialist economics, they're not too bad. And so they want to be friends with them. They want to learn. They want to cooperate. And that's how you gain support. If you help people locally, they're gonna like you. They like you, they're gonna consider your politics worth listening to, and some will even convert. And over time, you can gain more and more people until eventually you reach critical mass and can start implementing your policies. That's number one. 2. Hold yourself to standards. This should go without saying, because let's face it, when you're dealing with an economic system as already slandered as socialism is, you need to show that you are above. You physically cannot succeed. You, in all practice, cannot succeed if people view you as worse than the opposition, especially if you're in a country run by representatives, because, well, why would they vote for a socialist representative if they consider you immoral idiots? Well, they wouldn't, especially if they consider your opponent to be a better option. Heck, when it came to Trump, some people, despite him not being the best person, were willing to basically hold their noses because they believed everything else about his beliefs was better than the alternative. And thus, if you want to win, you need to, 1, show yourself to be of a higher standard so that more people are willing to say, well, this person's actually a decent human being, I want to vote for them. But you also need to think in terms of actually having good results. If you cannot provide good results, guess what? People aren't going to vote for you. Plain and simple. You can't take the 20% side of every 80-20 issue and expect to win. You need to fundamentally work with the people. And while you hold yourself to high standards, you fundamentally must say, all right, how do we help the people? How do we ensure our policies function? And how do we make sure that the negative effects of our policies don't come to fruition? You may not be able to achieve that, because let's face it, it's socialism, but that should be the forefront of a socialist's thoughts. How do we achieve this? By what means? How do we minimize the damage? Plan things out. And importantly, don't start cracking down on dissent. That leads to people basically saying, all right, another Stalin, another Mao, get rid of them. Remember, capitalism is the prime belief system of the day. Whether you agree with it or not doesn't matter. It is the main economic system that we have in this world of ours. A mixed market capitalist approach is the most common. As a result, you need to think first and foremost about how you are going to sway people to change that system. You can't do it by just preaching to the choir. You got to actually show that you're with the people, one, that you're above the capitalists morally, and that you're willing to cooperate with the people to ensure that things go well. I guarantee you, the socialists have one of the best arguments against immigration of anyone. The capitalists have to argue against their own beliefs regarding freedom of movement. Socialists don't have that because they can simply argue, we want to give you all these benefits for the worker. If you let the people in, the capitalists are going to take advantage of them, and now we're going to be able to give less benefits because we have to spread it across more people. Socialists have one of the best arguments against immigration of any group. If they made them, guess what? You'd gain a lot of support, especially with Middle America, who's actively worried about losing their jobs to illegal immigrants. The fact that people are going against that, who are socialist, is a very poor move. And finally, forgive me for referencing Gramsci, but you need to subvert things. Make socialism the new normal. As stated, fundamentally, we are in a capitalist society. This has its benefits and drawbacks, but importantly, it means that when it comes to socialism, it is going to look as an unnatural system that goes against everything people believe. By subverting things and making it so that socialism seems like the natural state, you ensure that people will, by nature, fall to you. Will it work completely? Of course not. It will never. Just as capitalism does not mean everyone suddenly worships capitalism. Believe me, if it did, we'd have a lot fewer problems, because at least we'd be consistent on one thing. But you need to subvert the culture to some extent. And people have tried. Boy, have they tried. But the immorality, the hypocrisy, and the lack of actually helping people is really hurting that. Because think about it, if you see a YouTuber like, let's say, Hassan Piker, one of the richest men that he knows, and he's not helping people, really, just talking about his beliefs while now getting in scandals for hurting his dog, do you think people are going to care what you say? No, because all they see is a hypocrite. If you have millions upon millions of dollars, you could easily buy other people's houses. You could set up public housing for them. You can make deals and say, hey, I make a lot of money as this job here. Let me pay for your public housing so that you poor people can have a house to live in or an apartment to rent. If you're constantly saying that other people should do it for you, but not willing to do it yourself, you look like a hypocrite, and understandably so. So when you're subverting things, when you're pushing that socialism is the natural state, show it with your actions. Use the other three to make it so that this seems like the natural state of humanity. I will again remind you, I do not hold these positions. But pure strategy involves thinking about how do you want to win, what is your objective, and what is your opponent going to do. Naturally, capitalists have many arguments against socialism, so you gotta kneecap them all. The hypocrisy and champagne socialists actually help people personally. Take care of them. Make sure that people know, hey, if you're injured, we, the socialists, will help you directly. Good way to get rid of that argument. Hold yourself to high standards. The constant flip-flopping and belief that socialists will just do anything to achieve their goals. Holding yourself to high standards stops that argument. Working with the people. Make sure that people don't view you as a detached elite. Going against common sense. Subvert things so that your way seems like common sense. And for the capitalists listening, pay attention as well. You can't just use the same arguments. You gotta actually break things down and explain them. Because fundamentally, socialists are playing to win. So are we. So is everyone else. Look at what they can do. Look at how they could do it. And think, alright, how do we cut them off at the pass? Here, here, and here. How do we make sure that no one believes this? How do we prove that this is wrong? That is how you win. So for the socialists, I highly recommend you take these 4 points. For everyone else, look at these 4 points and see how you can ensure that you do not end up losing to the socialists. They want to subvert things. How do you prevent that? They want to hold themselves to high standards. How do you ensure people don't view them as more moral because of that? How do you make sure that them working with the people does not make you lose support, etc., etc.? Think, plan, and act. It doesn't matter whether you agree with their position. You can still plan how they could win. And if you can plan how they win, you can plan how they can be countered. Think, act, adjust. I'll leave it to you. Thank you for watching.